So Instagram has over 1 billion users, and today we are going to discover which NBA teams actually have the most followers, ranked from number 30 to number 1. There are a few things that we need to understand when trying to figure out why these teams have so many followers or maybe so few followers. One of those things being average age of an Instagram user. The average age of an Instagram user is actually 25 to 34, so we need to take into account that for why teams have so many followers. That specific 25 through 34 generation grew up with the Bulls, Lakers, Spurs, and Cavaliers, whereas the older generations grew up with teams like the Celtics. So we're going to have to see the effects that has on team followers. Another thing that we need to consider is the population of the team's city. Teams with bigger cities tend to have more population to draw from and fan support, so we'll have to see how that correlates. And lastly, and most importantly in my opinion, it all comes down to the relevance of the team during Instagram's peak years. So, surprise, surprise, we're going to see a lot of Warriors Instagram followers, and that is most likely because they were the most prevalent over the last decade when we know Instagram was growing the most, considering Instagram opened in 2010, but it really started getting popular in 2015. And one last side trend that I've noticed before we start the video, a lot of teams have a lot of followers if they have a major star, especially in the last 4 years. So Milwaukee is the smallest population out of any single team in the NBA. However, they rank somewhere in the middle with followers, most likely because of Giannis. Same for Houston and Oklahoma City. Oklahoma City, I'll use it as an example because they as well have a very small population, but they've had a ton of star power over Instagram's highest relevance, such as Chris Paul, Paul George, Kevin Durant, James Harden, Russell Westbrook, and so on. All right, we're going to start with the Memphis Grizzlies coming in at 30th place. They only have 1 million followers, which isn't that surprising that they're in last place considering their population is only 650,000 people. They're not that generational of a team considering they were in Vancouver 20 years ago. And like I said, stars tend to attract players, and throughout Instagram's lifespan, they were the grit and grind Grizzlies. They were good, but they didn't really have a star. Now they have Ja Morant, which is why I think they won't be in 30th place for long. Coming in at number 29, we have the Utah Jazz. Now this is not surprising to me either that they're coming in this place. Yes, they've been good, they've been relevant, but they haven't had a star over the decade from 2010 to 2020 when Instagram started to when Instagram became big. And their city's population is only 200,000 people. So they have an uphill battle to begin with, and it's pretty cool that they are not in last place if you want to take something away as a Jazz fan. They have been in Utah for, I want to say, about 40 years though. So they are a generational team, but they haven't had generational success. Coming in at 28th, we have the Orlando Magic with 1.1 million followers. So this team's been pretty bad from the decade where Instagram's been big. And for a team to have a lot of followers, you have to be successful on the court. So not only have they not had a star other than maybe Aaron Gordon and his dunk contest, this isn't much of a big surprise to me. Their city's population is 285,000 people. Their metro area, which means their area where they have around the cities, a little bit bigger. A lot of people live in Florida. But number 28 for Orlando, not that surprising to me. Coming in at 27, we have the Detroit Pistons. And similarly to Orlando's fortune, they just haven't been good all decade when Instagram's been big, and they haven't had a star player on their team. You may argue Blake Griffin maybe, but he has only been on the team for 2 years, and he wasn't really a star. Yeah, he made an all-star team, but from 2010 to 2020, maybe Andre Drummond, maybe Greg Monroe, but I don't think they made the playoffs all day. Well, yeah, they made the playoffs, but they've been an 8 seed every single time they made the playoffs. And yes, there's a lot of basketball roots in Detroit, so they are a generational team, so they do have fans. But number 27, considering it's Instagram, and you have to be relevant for Instagram, doesn't surprise me that much either. Now, this one does surprise me, and it may be because I'm a homer and I'm a Nuggets fan, but the Nuggets come in at number 26. They've been relevant for the majority of Instagram's peak. However, they had a span in the middle of the decade from 2014 to 2016, 2017 when they didn't make the playoffs, which is pretty vital to Instagram following growth. Their city comes in at 620,000, and they haven't really had too much star power this decade. Yeah, they had Carmelo at the beginning of the decade, but nobody really had Instagram back then. Like I say, from about 2014 to 2020 is when Instagram became big, and they weren't that relevant during then. They have Jokic now, but he's not that big of a name. The casual NBA fan probably doesn't even know who Nikola Jokic is, despite him being a top 5 player, top 10 player. But the Nuggets come in at number 26, which hurts my heart, but I understand why. But what I don't understand is why the Charlotte Hornets rank higher than the Denver Nuggets. The Hornets have been pretty abysmal ever since their start. They haven't had much stability in Charlotte. They moved to New Orleans. They were originally the Hornets. Then they were the Charlotte Hornets. They moved to New Orleans. Then that's why the New Orleans Hornets became the New Orleans Hornets. Then the Hornets changed their name to the Pelicans. Then an expansion team came back to Charlotte. They called themselves the Bobcats. The Bobcats were around at the beginning of the decade. They were pretty bad. In fact, they were the worst. And the only thing that I could see why they rank higher than teams like Denver and Detroit is their city's population's a little bit higher. They have 872,000 people. Basketball is very big in Charlotte. That's where UNC and Duke are located near. And Michael Jordan's the owner. But aside from that, I'm surprised that they're not in last, considering their history and their lack of star power on the team. So, like I say, Jordan and basketball being big in North Carolina are my reasons why. Coming in at number 24, we have the Atlanta Hawks. Now, this doesn't surprise me much. I know I'm going to sound like a record player, but basketball's pretty big in Atlanta. They have 1.3 million followers. They haven't had much star power this decade. As we can see, that's a theme. They do have Trae Young now, who's their biggest star by far this decade. Sorry, Josh Smith. And they are gaining traction. They are going up in the rankings. And their city's population is 500K, but like Orlando, they're a city where their metro area is a little bit bigger. A lot of people live around Atlanta. They don't just live in Atlanta. So 1.3 million, Atlanta at 24. Number 23, we have the Sacramento Kings. Like all of you know, I hope you guys know, there's a lot of people in California. A lot of people in Northern California, a lot of people all over California. The Kings have been bad all decade long. And other than DeMarcus Cousins, they haven't had a star. But they have a lot of people. They have 508,000 people living in the city, but there's a lot of people in California. They have a lot of people living around Sacramento. And they, I suppose, are a generational team. They were pretty decent at the beginning of the millennium, but they haven't made the playoffs since 2006. So that definitely attributes to them being ranked in the 20s. Next up, we have the Washington Wizards coming in at number 22 with 1.5 million followers. They have 702,000 people living in DC itself, and similar to all these other teams, I suppose the thing that they have going for them, why they're ranked so high, considering they haven't had much success as a franchise, they don't have any rings, they haven't really had too many notable stars. They were good when Instagram was getting big. They had a few playoff runs, 2016 and 2017. Those Kelly Oubre, John Wall, and Bradley Beal runs. So maybe people are getting interested. Maybe the younger generation was saying, "Ooh, I'm going to be a Wizards fan." So that's my analysis as why they're 22. I'm sure you have your own analysis, and that's fine. But that's why I think they're 22. 1.5 million followers, Washington Wizards. Next up, we have the Phoenix Suns, and the trend continues of teams who just haven't had a good decade. That's why I'm saying that's the correlation. You have to be good to gain followers. So the Suns come at 1.5 million. They are the first team we see that has a near even population Instagram follower. So far, every team that we've had has had almost double, if not triple, followers compared to population. Phoenix's population, they're the sixth biggest city in the country. They have 1.6 million people. They have 1.5 million followers. They haven't made the playoffs since 2010. And Instagram started in 2010. So a whole decade of not being that great. And they haven't really had a star player, just like all the other teams that I'm talking about. They have Devin Booker and Ayton, as you may argue, but they haven't been that relevant for that long. Booker arrived at the scene in 2017, but they haven't been good. You could argue Eric Bledsoe, but like I say with the Nuggets, the casual fan doesn't know who Eric Bledsoe is when he was a Sun in the middle of the decade. So Phoenix, number 21. Now we're going to start getting in the more relevant teams over the decade. We have the Dallas Mavericks. As you see, yes, they were the 2011 NBA champions. That was their one ring. And they were a lot lower a couple of years ago. They were in the lower 20s, actually, because they weren't good all decade other than that run in 2011, but not many people had Instagram back then. So the Mavericks rank in at number 20, and I'm going to say they've gained so much traction because of Luka Doncic. Like I say, star power brings the followers, and Luka is a star. He's a young star, and that's what the people want, especially on Instagram, especially the younger generation that lives on Instagram. So that's my reasoning is why the Mavericks come in number 20. Number 19, we have a team who has been good all decade. Maybe not at the beginning of the decade. But they have the stars. They have the playoff relevancy. They are the Portland Trail Blazers coming in at number 19. Their city population, 653,000, but they have 1.8 million followers. And I'm going to attribute that to them having Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum, two of the NBA's more notable stars, two of the NBA's more notable leaders. If you're a fan of either of those players, more likely than not, you're going to follow their Instagram page. And that's why Portland has 1.8 million followers, and it's higher than teams like Dallas, Atlanta, and Denver. They made the playoffs, but they haven't had much success. They made the Western Conference Finals last year. And maybe that's why they have so many followers as well. Like I say, the more recent your success, the more people are on Instagram. So that could be a big reason why. And we're really going to see that with Cleveland. Next up, this one was a big shocker to me. We have the Indiana Pacers ranking higher than teams like Portland and Dallas. To me, the only reason I think that they have so many followers is because people love basketball in Indiana. So if you live in Indianapolis, you're a Pacers fan. That, to me, is one of the few cities in the NBA where it really matters, where they have a ton of geographic loyalty. There's only 900,000 people live in Indiana, but they have 1.8 million followers. They've been good all decade, and another reason I think they have so many followers is because they had Paul George on their team, and Paul George is a marquee star in the NBA. So if you're a Paul George fan and you're an Instagram follower, it's likely that you're going to follow the Pacers. He's not on the Pacers anymore, but I'm assuming people kept their loyalty to the Pacers, or they just forgot to unfollow them. So Indiana coming in at number 18. And another surprising team to me is the Minnesota Timberwolves coming in at number 17. I thought for sure they would be in the bottom three. Their city population is only 500,000 people. They haven't made the playoffs other than that 1 year in 2018. Since 2004, they have been arguably the worst team in the NBA over their 40-year history. They made the playoffs 3 times, I believe, and their peak was Kevin Garnett's 2004 Timberwolves, where they didn't do much with that team either. They've blown a bunch of talent. But this isn't about me just dogpiling on Minnesota. 1.9 million followers. The only thing that I can think of is they were one of those teams that had a really bright future, so people love to jump on the young talent when they had Wiggins and Towns, and it didn't pan out, and they had Butler too. So, but people just stayed following them, just like Indiana. So that's my reasoning. But what do I know? I'm just using my context clues to analyze. All right, coming in at number 16, we have the New Orleans Pelicans. And this too, just like Dallas, has made a major climb. And obviously that's because they've had a ton of young talent come into New Orleans and a ton of star power. Also, they've had Anthony Davis for the majority of the decade, which definitely does attribute to them having so many followers. New Orleans is one of the smaller teams in the NBA in terms of population for their city. They only have 391,000 people living in New Orleans. And basketball has had a pretty unstable history in New Orleans, considering the franchise has only been there for 25 years. But they have the star power and recency, and that is a big reason why. So New Orleans coming in number 16. Coming in at number 15, we have the Brooklyn We Go Hard Nets. This to me makes sense. They're 15. They're in the complete middle of the pack because they have star power there right now. So when people saw that Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant were coming to Brooklyn, or maybe even prior, you had Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett coming to Brooklyn, people jump on the bandwagon and they want to follow Brooklyn. Also, they are a team in the biggest city in the entire United States, in New York City. Maybe they have some loyalty as well from New Jersey, their time in New Jersey. But Brooklyn, being in the middle of the pack, they haven't had much success, but they've been relevant throughout the course of the decade. So it makes sense that they're where they are. Next up, now this is embarrassing. The New York Knicks, the franchise of New York City, coming in at number 14. Let me say this. New York has been in New York City for over 70 years. And they have won championship. And this is why they are where they are. And they've been horrible for the past 2 decades, 3 decades. And they've been really bad all of this decade, other than Melo's run in 2013. So every single team so far, other than Brooklyn and Phoenix, has more followers than people living there. Now this is embarrassing because the Knicks only have 2.4 million followers, but 8.4 million people live in New York. So for every person who lives in New York, only 1/4 of them follow technically the team. So the ratio is really bad, and it's just a depressing situation. The Knicks should be in the top 3, if not in the top 3, considering how marquee of a franchise they are and what their population is. But they're only 14. They barely make the top half of Instagram followers. All right. Next up, we have the Philadelphia 76ers coming in at 13. 2.4 million followers. Makes sense considering their relevancy the past 5 years. They have Joel Embiid. They have Ben Simmons. They were a meme in the middle of the decade when they were the Process Sixers, so people are getting on board. People love Joel Embiid, especially on Instagram, so they probably will drop the Sixers a follow. So they're coming in at number 13. 1.6 million people for their population. It makes sense. Coming in at number 12, we have the Milwaukee Bucks. Now, the Bucks are the example I used at the beginning of the video. They only have 600,000 people living in Milwaukee, but they have 2.8 million followers. This is because Giannis, MVP Giannis. If you're a fan of Giannis, you're going to follow the Bucks, and Giannis has a tons of fans because he's one of the 3 best players in the league currently, especially the past 3 years. And that's really where the followers come in because Instagram's growth is exponential the past 3 years. I believe it's tripled every single year since 2018. So it makes sense. Bucks, even though small population, small market, are in number 12 for the NBA. Coming in at number 11, we have the San Antonio Spurs, who had their spotlight more in the middle of the decade, but I'm sure they have a ton of generational fans, considering they have 5 championships, 5-time NBA champion. So yeah, they have a lot of loyalty, and they won a title in the span of Instagram being existing itself. So the Spurs at number 11, 3 million followers. Not so good anymore, and more of a small market. 1.5 million people living there. But it makes sense considering their franchise's success. Coming in at number 10, we have the LA Clippers. They have 3.1 million followers, and they have 4 million people living in LA. But that's not really their fault considering they haven't had strong roots in Los Angeles. They've been there for 35 years, 40 years, but they weren't always there like the Lakers were always there. So a lot of people gravitate towards the Lakers instead of the Clippers. And they also have the Lakers to be competing with. They have star power now, and they're in a big city. They have Paul George and they have Kawhi Leonard. And they're at 3.1 million followers. All right, now I'm just going to go through them now that you know the baseline reasoning of why each team has so many followers. So the Raptors won a title last year. They had a star, and their city's population is 2.9 million. Coming in at number 8, we have the Miami Heat. They were probably the most popular team in the entire country at the beginning of the decade. But they had LeBron, they had Dwayne Wade, but they haven't been that relevant since. They're still a marquee name considering they're number 8, though, with 4 million followers. Coming up next, this makes me happy. We have the Oklahoma City Thunder coming in at number 7. They've had a ton of star power all decade long consistently, which is why they're so high, even though they're one of the more random cities in the entire NBA. They've had Paul George, they've had Russell Westbrook, they've had Kevin Durant, they've had Chris Paul, they've had James Harden. They made a finals, but that was way at the beginning of the decade, but they've been relevant all decade long. So that's why they rank at number 7. Coming in at number 6, we have the Houston Rockets. They've been good all decade, but they've had one of the best players in the league in James Harden during Instagram's peak, which in my opinion is why they rank so high. And they have a lot of people living in their city, and they've been good for the past 30 years, really. They've had a finals run at the beginning of the 90s. They've had Yao Ming. They have fans, so especially in China. And maybe that's a factor as to why they come in number 6 as well. Because China, the Rockets are China's team. Coming in at number 5, we have the Boston Celtics. I'm surprised they're only number 5. I'm surprised they're not higher. I believe they have the most championships in the entire NBA, more than the Lakers. They have 17 championships. They're a generational team, and a lot of fans who don't live in Boston like the Celtics just because of the whole Larry Bird thing during the 80s and 90s. And a lot of dads out there make their children become Celtics fans. So that could be why. There's a lot of loyalty to this team. They haven't been the best, but they've been relevant all decade long. And they've had some stars. They had they've had Garnett. They've had Paul Pierce. They've had now Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown at this end of the decade. So it makes sense. Celtics, number 5. Coming in at number 4, we have the Chicago Bulls. They've been pretty bad all decade long. They were good more so towards the beginning of the decade. They've had Derrick Rose, but since then they've been bad. So this has a lot to do with the fortitude Michael Jordan has left in his legacy on the franchise. And Chicago is the 3rd biggest city in the country behind LA and New York. So they have a lot of people, and they have one of the most dominant and marquee stars in the entire history of the NBA, and a lot of that translates to today with followers. So Chicago comes in number 4. Number 3 is great to me because it's the Cleveland Cavaliers with a whopping 7.9 million followers. Now we're going to really get some numbers here. The people in Cleveland are only 383,000. Only 383,000 people live in Cleveland. However, they have 8 million followers. For a franchise that, other than when LeBron was there, has been really bad. But LeBron was there twice, and that has to do with why they have so many followers. And they were in 4 straight finals during Instagram's biggest growth. A lot of that, like I say, if you're a fan of a player, you're going to follow their team. And let me show you how many followers LeBron has. LeBron has 63 million followers, and he was on Cleveland during Instagram's growth. So if you're, like I say, if you're a fan of the player, you follow the team. So 8 million followers just about for Cleveland. It's crazy, and you would have no idea why if you didn't know LeBron was on the team, considering their history and how well they've played when he's not on the team. But Cleveland coming in at number 3 is one of the more interesting Easter eggs in this video. Coming in at number 2, leave your comment right now. Who do you think it's going to be? Do you think number 2 is going to be the Warriors, the team who made 5 finals this decade every single year when Instagram was at its height? Or do you think it's been the Lakers, who have had a really strong year considering that LeBron's been on the team and a lot of Kobe fans out there, especially since his death? So leave a comment. Is number 2 going to be the Lakers or is it going to be the Warriors? Who's going to win? And unpause the video now. And coming in at number 2 are the Los Angeles Lakers, barely behind the Warriors at 13.3 million followers. I'm going to say the reason they're not number 1 is they just haven't been good all decade. They haven't made the playoffs since 2012. Yeah, 2012, 2013. And they haven't had any stars other than Kobe and LeBron the past 2 years, year and a half. So that's definitely why they have so many followers, but that's why they're not number 1. And they live in Los Angeles. They play in Los Angeles, 8 million followers. They have 16 championships. They have a ton of history in LA. They are Los Angeles' team in what is now, in my opinion, the basketball capital of the country. They've taken that from New York because the Knicks have been so bad. But the Lakers coming in at number 2. And at number 1, no surprise, Golden State Warriors. 5 straight finals, 6 championships overall, 3 championships this decade. They've had 2 of the league's 4 biggest stars this decade, in Curry and Durant, when Instagram was at its height. And other than that, I mean, it speaks for itself. They've been really relevant during Instagram's growth, and that is why they have so many followers, and they have a bunch of star power, and they play in California where there's a ton of people. So they basically have the trifecta going as to so many followers. So to recap, we have Memphis at 30, Utah at 29, Orlando at 28, Detroit at 27, Denver at 26, Charlotte at 25, Atlanta at 24, Sacramento at 23, DC at 22, Phoenix at 21, Dallas at 20, Portland at 19, Indiana at 18, Minnesota at 17, New Orleans at 16, Brooklyn at 15, New York at 14, Philly at 13, Milwaukee, MKE at 12, the Spurs at 11, the Clippers at 10, Toronto at 9, Miami at 8, OKC at 7, Houston at 6, Beantown, Boston. Nobody calls it Beantown except people not from Boston, and I'm not from Boston, at number 5. Chicago at number 4. Cleveland, this is for you, at number 3. The Lakers at number 2. And the Golden State Warriors with 14.4 million followers. Considering there's a billion followers on Instagram, they have 1.4% of people who have an account follow. Yeah, 1.4 people who have an account follow Golden State. So that's kind of impressive. But aside from that, everyone, if you're still watching, I do appreciate you. Leave a like on the video if this is something that you enjoyed, and leave a comment if you want me to do something like this with the NFL. Was this too long? Let me know. Maybe I can condense it and make it a little bit more flashy. But aside from that, I appreciate you for watching and staying with me, and I will see you next time.